a lot of shaking up. I've got Boise State in at 12. I think that Boise State could end up being at 11 or 10, maybe even 9 by the time it's all said and done. But they would need some teams to lose, I guess, to get up there. I think Boise State is in at this point, assuming that Army can't upset a Notre Dame or something crazy like that. Um, at 11, man, I'm really racking my brain here. Maybe Mark, you could help me figure this out. But Miami or Penn State? I mean, assuming Miami loses to SMU, how much are they going to be penalized having that second loss when you're comparing them to a Penn State team that doesn't play in a conference championship, assuming that they win out and are 11-1 with no big win? I mean, I don't know. You compare the strength of schedules between Miami and Penn State, and I mean, just looking at it real quick here, Miami is sitting at 39 so far this season. They're going to be 56th for the remainder of their schedule. Then you look at Penn State; they're sitting at 30th, and they're going to be 57th for the remainder of their schedule. So, I mean, you're really splitting hairs between these two teams, and if both of them have one loss, again, Miami plays for their conference championship, but Penn State doesn't. What's going to happen there? I mean, I have no idea. I think that's probably if things shake out the way that this projection is assuming that it does. I think the college football playoff committee has their hands full with
Hmm.
this one.
Well,
So
here's
go
my
ahead.
thing with that, real quick. Then you got to start looking at losses, right? Who lost to who? And Miami lost to a just a not very good Georgia Tech team, right? I mean, let's just be real about it. It was the perfect storm for Miami. It was a possession offense that and a defense that probably played their best day, right? That was probably the best game we've seen from Georgia Tech overall defensively. So you got your offense playing defense and your defense playing some good defense too, right? And they drop a game. And then you got Penn State who loses to Ohio State. But if you really watch that game, I mean, that's great. A loss to Ohio State, you know, that carries some weight. Obviously, a loss to Ohio State is better than a loss to Georgia Tech. But Penn State never scored an offensive point against Ohio State. You know what I'm saying? So eye test has got to come in at some point. You can't count a loss against Miami in a conference championship game, right? Unless they just get beat 70-0, and that's not going to happen. This team's not getting skunked or blown out. I anticipate SMU Miami matchup would be competitive and high scoring. But I don't, even if they lose that game, how do you count that against them when Penn State's sitting at home not playing anyone? Now, we've seen this happen before. We've seen Alabama in a 4-team playoff sit home on conference championship weekend and not play and make their way to a college football playoff and win a national championship, by the way, doing that. Um, so, yeah, it's a bit of a conundrum. I would tip my cap to Miami. Um, and especially considering the fact that the Big Ten will probably already have 3 teams in, right? So, uh, how do you? I don't know. How do you justify throwing a fourth Big Ten team in? Um, over a Miami that played in a conference championship game. That'll be a tough decision.
I think if you're the playoff committee, you're hoping that Miami just takes care of SMU, and you could take SMU out of this, maybe potentially, um, or I guess you're hoping that Ohio State can beat Indiana next week, and um, at that point, I guess you're comparing Penn State to Indiana, and then who gets in over, between Penn State and Indiana. A lot of questions there. I think the Big Ten race is as juicy as any of them when it comes to the college football playoff prediction here. I've got Georgia at 10. I'm assuming that Georgia wins out. I don't think that they have we were talking about it last night, Mark. Maybe the best case scenario for Georgia after the loss is to host a playoff game, but I just don't see it. I don't see how you get to be number 8. You're not getting above Ole Miss, obviously, with 2 losses. I think that you maybe could sneak in front of Ohio State, maybe. But then you're also looking at at Notre Dame, and their schedule with only one loss. Interesting to think about here, but make no doubt about it. If Georgia wins this week, they're in some capacity. I just don't know if they're going to be hosting at
Yeah.
this point.
Well, here's the thing. So if Georgia beats Tennessee, I think the committee will put them over Notre Dame.
Hmm.
Considering the fact that Notre Dame is independent, Notre Dame should needs to join a conference, and they're going to figure that out as this. Them not being in a conference didn't work out great in the 14 playoff. It's not going to work out great here. It doesn't work out great in any scenario. They need to join a conference. Probably need to join the Big Ten, I guess.
Hmm.
But with that being said, I lost to NIU, and then look at Notre Dame's schedule the rest of the way. There's no good wins anywhere close to what Georgia would. We're assuming here. We're assuming, and a big assumption. Georgia would have a win over Tennessee, and they have already gotten a 15-point win over Texas at Texas.
Hmm.
So, um, I think that Georgia might be placed, over Notre Dame. But again, Georgia really doesn't control their destiny for any situation at this point. They've lost control of the SEC, any control they did have, and I think that they're kind of relying on some other teams to stumble as far as being able to host a home playoff game.
Yeah.
I think you're relying on some other stuff to happen, um, and the whole BYU and SMU situation is interesting to me as well. BYU beat SMU head to head, so that obviously would put BYU in a better, a better location as far as that third spot. But that puts them in a much harder bracket of this college football playoff. I feel like. Um,
Hmm.
so that's almost like bad luck for BYU. That'd be the first bad luck they've had this season, right? Gotten lucky a few times, and if they somehow do get bounced out of that corner bracket, that's more than likely going to have that 12 seed with it. Then I think that definitely changes the outcome here a little bit, and maybe um, you know harder to win a first round playoff game in a different bracket. Indy Nation put in the comment section, BYU got lucky last night. If Utah didn't get that defensive hold, Utah wins that game. And yeah, I mean, and that was a hold that on a guy that had nothing to do with the play, also. So I saw exactly what you're talking about, Indy. Dude holds an offensive player that had nothing to do with the play, right? So yeah, BYU strikes again and then scores at the end of the game almost as time expires. So look, I watched Michigan get lucky a few times last year too. You know what I'm saying? When Georgia won a national championship in 22 and 21, they got lucky multiple times both seasons. You got to have a little luck to win a championship. I mean, that's just is what it is. Um, you can be great, all this stuff. It's hard to do it week in and week out with a little bit of without a little bit of favor. Um, what else you got on this one? I that 3 and 4 spot. It'll be interesting how that works out. I think
Yeah.
Oregon or Indiana is a shoe in for the number one spot, and that's assuming Indiana can beat Ohio State, which I think they can. Um,
Right.
it's going to be
Well,
a hell
and
of a task, but we'll see.
that's one of the key matchups that this playoff bracket is projecting. This is obviously projecting an Indiana win over Ohio State, which I feel less and less confident about that, especially after the Michigan game. But I think that the Hoosiers could definitely win that football game with the way their offense has performed. Um, in weeks past. And then you're looking at Ohio State with two losses to two top five teams. So it's pretty quality little schedule there, which is what puts them ahead of Ole Miss in this scenario. Georgia can't overleap Ole Miss because they just lost to them. And then I'm thinking Notre Dame at 9 instead of Georgia, just because you don't want to see a rematch of Ole Miss and Notre Dame or Ole Miss and Georgia. So you'd rather throw Notre Dame in there and allow a Big Ten matchup for Georgia between Georgia and Ohio State. And then you look at Texas and you're just thinking, my gosh, this number 2 seed just doesn't feel right because whoever wins between Georgia and Ohio State has to face Texas. and you're sitting there number 2 team in the country, assuming that you win the SEC championship game, and you've got the hardest side of the bracket. It seems like
Yeah.
really tough little matchup there for them. But yeah, I mean, through this, I'm assuming that Texas is able to win out. They got to beat Arkansas and beat Texas A&M. Those are two big matchups for them. And then I think that Alabama wins out, which would have them, I'm assuming, in the college or in the SEC championship game going up against Texas. I've got Texas winning that one with the way their offense is surging right now. But then Alabama would not be, would not be penalized too much for that loss. So they slide in at the number 6 spot. It's just interesting. I like to do this college football playoff prediction bracket after we see a lot of upsets, a lot of top 10 losses and things like that in the college football or in the week to week, I guess, throughout college football. And I think that this week just kind of warranted it, based on what we saw. It's just really interesting to me. I don't know. I feel like we've covered everything here so far, but when you really put it into perspective and you look at the remaining schedules, I think that this could be pretty wacky. And also, I've got BYU in there at number 3, but what if Colorado sneaks up and takes the Big 12 from them? They would slide into the 4 spot, and then you'd move SMU over to 3, which there's no guarantee SMU beats Miami at the end of the year. So maybe Miami is in there at 3. Just a lot to be determined at this point. This is how I have it projected to finish as of right now. I'm picking a couple of upsets, namely Indiana beating Ohio State, and then SMU beating Miami in the ACC championship game. But I'm anxious to hear what you guys think about this. Who do y'all have winning these conference championships? That's I think that's pretty much the biggest question when you look at this bracket. Who do you have winning those championship games? If you look at the remaining schedule for the remainder of the season, there's not a whole lot in the regular season that you can look at and kind of glean from. There are a few matchups: Indiana at Ohio State, Georgia at Tennessee, Texas at Texas A&M, and outside of that, there's not a whole lot of regular season matchups that can really affect the college football playoff, as a lot of the teams that you see on this in this top 12 have sort of easy games that they're going to be heavily favored in. So, barring some massive upset, I really feel like this is kind of what it's going to look like.
Yeah, and I just I wanted to pull up the Big 12 conference, standings and just kind of take a look at this. And Colorado, while they do have 2 losses, guys, I mean they have 1 loss in the Big 12, right? So excuse me. Colorado's sitting pretty. I mean, they're sitting in a pretty good spot here. They're going to play Utah this week coming up. I don't know if Utah's maybe that was their last gasp of air this past weekend, and I think that's possible. It's a struggling Utah team, but a well coached one that I feel like more than likely that team's going to be ready to go and ready to beat Colorado. So we'll see. Colorado has been really impressive, but um, you can take a look and see there. I mean, Colorado's got the inside track. How about that? Imagine if Colorado can somehow figure out a way to get to that Big 12 championship game. And man, that's just huge stakes for a team that I thought would struggle to make a bowl game, just to be honest with you. And we looked at the Big 10 conference standings on the last show that we did. I'm sorry, guys. I inhaled my drink, so I'm sorry. Tight race there as well, right? Tight race. Just I wanted to kind of take a look at some of these. Look at the SEC here as we kind of wind things down. Tennessee sitting pretty at the top, 5-1 in the conference. A&M 5-1 in the conference. Longhorns 4-1, and then start your 2 lost teams there. So still got some stuff that's got to be somewhat worked out, man. I mean, I know that they're not huge matchups, but what happens if Auburn beats Alabama at the end of the season? And I know that sounds silly, But it sounded silly last year too. And Auburn should have won that football game. I mean, let's just be real. Um, there's still some things that could happen that could change these. These two teams here, or excuse me, these two teams here, Texas and Texas A&M, still matching up at the end of the season. So it's going to go a long way in deciding that as well. And I think that's a super intriguing matchup. So we're still trying to figure it out. Here we go, late into the season. Big boys with a bunch of losses, right? And it's just it feels weird. It feels weird, but 2 losses in today's college football don't mean nothing unless you lose to, I guess, one nobodies, but you can make it up with a couple of good wins. Ask Notre Dame. So interesting stuff there. Interesting stuff.